The stars had always been mapped. Every planet, every asteroid, every speck of dust floating in the endless void had been catalogued by the Dominion Council centuries ago. Their massive ships traveled between worlds like buses on well-worn roads, carrying goods and messages across distances that would take light years to cross. The galaxy was orderly controlled and peaceful under their rule. Commander Vos sat in his comfortable chair aboard the monitoring station, watchful eye, sipping his morning drink while reviewing the daily reports. The station floated in empty space between star systems, its sensors reaching out like invisible fingers to touch every corner of the galaxy. Nothing happened without the Dominion knowing about it. Nothing important, anyway. The screen in front of him showed the usual list of developing worlds. Most were still learning to make fire properly. A few had discovered electricity. Even fewer had managed to split the atom without blowing themselves up. These primitive species were watched carefully, but they posed no threat to the established order. They were like children learning to walk while giants ruled the playground. "Sir, we have a new classification request," said his assistant, Lieutenant Kara. She was young for a Karathi, barely 300 years old, and still eager to make every small discovery seem important. Voss looked up from his reports with mild interest. "What sector?" "Outer Spiral Arm, designation Milky Way, a species called humans. They just achieved faster-than-light travel." The commander's interest faded quickly. Another primitive species taking baby steps into space. It happened dozens of times each year. "Standard classification. Threat level?" Kara consulted her datapad. "Negligible, sir. Carbon-based bipeds, average lifespan of less than 100 standard years. They barely escape their own gravity. Well, single planet origin. No signs of aggressive expansion capabilities." Voss nodded and made a note in the file. The humans would be monitored by the automated systems like all the others. If they showed any sign of becoming a problem, a single Dominion battleship could end their civilization before they knew what hit them. But that was unlikely. Most species either destroyed themselves within a few centuries or submitted to Dominion rule when they encountered more advanced civilizations. The humans would probably do the same. "File it with the others," he said, already turning back to more pressing matters. "And make sure the economic department knows they might have some new trading partners in a few decades." Meanwhile, 300 light years away, Dr. Emma Walsh stood on the observation deck of Gateway Station and watched history being made. Below her, through the transparent metal floor, she could see Earth in all its blue and green glory. Above her, the massive construction arms of the station were putting the finishing touches on humanity's first interstellar vessel designed for deep space exploration. The breakthrough had come faster than anyone expected. One day they were struggling to get small probes beyond the edge of their solar system, and the next they had cracked the secrets of quantum tunneling. The technology wasn't perfect yet, but it worked. More importantly, it worked quietly. "Dr. Walsh," called Captain Rick Barnes from across the deck. He was the man chosen to command the first human colony ship, and his excitement was barely contained. "The quantum drive is online. We're ready for the test run." Emma smiled. The test run would take them to Proxima Centauri and back, a journey that would have taken thousands of years with conventional propulsion. With the quantum drive, they could do it in 3 days. But that wasn't the most important part of the test. The most important part was that they had learned to hide. Emma had spent years studying every piece of alien technology they could find. Most of it came from crashed ships that the aliens themselves had written off as lost. From these fragments, humanity had learned about sensor networks, detection grids, and monitoring systems that covered the entire galaxy. They had also learned that these systems had blind spots. "Remember," Emma said to Captain Barnes, "we follow the dark routes. No direct paths between stars. No energy signatures that match known propulsion systems. As far as the galaxy knows, We're still struggling with chemical rockets, Barnes nodded. He understood the importance of staying hidden. Every human who worked on the space program had been briefed on what happened to species that revealed their strength too early. The galaxy was full of dead worlds that had once been home to civilizations that grew too fast and too openly. Back on the monitoring station, the automated systems dutifully recorded the quantum signature from humanity's first FTL test. The computers analyzed the data, compared it to known propulsion types, and filed it under unknown natural phenomenon. The signature was too weak and too brief to be artificial. Probably just another star flare or gravitational anomaly, Lieutenant Kara happened to be monitoring the sector when the reading came through. She looked at it for a moment, considering whether to report it to Commander Voss, but the computer had already classified it as natural, and she had more important things to worry about. The Dominion was planning a new trade route through the sector, and that required her full attention. The human test flight was a complete success. Captain Barnes and his crew traveled to Proxima Centauri, established a small monitoring post, and returned to Earth without being detected. More importantly, they had proven that the dark routes worked. There were paths between stars that the galactic powers didn't watch, either because they thought them impossible to navigate, or because they led to nothing of value. Emma reviewed the mission reports with growing excitement. The dark routes weren't just possible, they were easy once you knew the secret. The galaxy's monitoring systems were designed to watch the major hyperspace lanes and the obvious paths between inhabited systems. They weren't looking for ships. That took the long way around, traveling through empty space and using gravitational slingshots to change direction. Within 6 months, 3 more gateway stations were under construction. Each one would be the starting point for a different route into the galaxy, following paths that wouldn't show up on any Dominion star chart. The plan was simple: spread quietly, grow slowly, and stay invisible until they were strong enough to reveal themselves. Dr. Emma Walsh stood on the observation deck and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, alien civilizations were going about their daily business, secure in their knowledge that they controlled everything that mattered. They had no idea that a new player had just entered the game. The galaxy didn't notice when humanity took its first steps into the dark. The monitoring systems recorded nothing unusual. The reports filed that day mentioned no new threats or emerging civilizations worth watching. As far as the Dominion Council knew, the humans were still trapped on their single world, dreaming of the stars but lacking the technology to reach them. It was the first of many times the galaxy would fail to notice what humanity was really doing. And by the time they finally looked closely at the quiet species from the outer spiral arm, it would be far too late to stop what they had started in the darkness between the stars. 50 years had passed since humanity's first quiet steps into the galaxy, and the universe continued its ancient dance. The Karathi Empire expanded its borders by absorbing 2 smaller civilizations that had grown too bold too quickly. The Nexus Trade Federation reported record profits as new shipping routes opened through recently conquered space. Everything was proceeding according to the natural order that had governed the galaxy for thousands of years. Commander Voss, now promoted to senior commander, still monitored the outer spiral arms from his station. His hair had turned silver with age, but his routine remained the same. Every morning he reviewed the automated reports, cataloged new developments, and filed them according to their threat levels. The humans still appeared in his reports, but their progress seemed painfully slow compared to the galactic powers. Around them, the monitoring system showed that humanity had established colonies on 17 worlds over the past 5 decades. This was exactly what Voss expected from a developing species. They were expanding at a reasonable pace, choosing nearby star systems with suitable planets, and following predictable patterns of growth. Nothing to worry about. Nothing that required special attention. What the systems didn't see was the Shadow Fleet. Admiral Marcus Reed stood on the bridge of the HSS Defiance, humanity's first true warship, hidden in the gravitational shadow of a rogue planet drifting through empty space. The ship was massive, larger than anything humanity had built before, but it remained invisible to the galaxy's watching eyes. Around him, holographic displays showed the real scope of human expansion. 200 colonies. Not 17. The public. Colonies were the ones the aliens were meant to see. They were established on obvious worlds, using conventional technology, and growing at exactly the rate that wouldn't alarm anyone. Each one was real, populated by real humans who lived real lives. But they were just the tip of an iceberg that stretched far deeper than anyone imagined. The hidden colonies were different. They were built on worlds that didn't appear on any galactic survey, reached by routes that no alien would think to follow. Some were established in the hearts of nebulae, where sensor readings were unreliable. Others were built on planets orbiting dead stars that the galaxy had written off as worthless. A few were hidden in asteroid belts that looked empty from a distance, but contained carefully camouflaged installations. Dr. Lisa Park, now head of the Colonial Development Authority, had spent her career perfecting the art of invisible expansion. From her office on New Geneva, a world that officially didn't exist, she coordinated the settlement of 3 new planets every year. Each colony was self-sufficient within a decade. Each contributed to humanity's growing industrial base, and each remained completely off the galactic radar. The key was patience. While other species rushed to claim territory and announce their presence, humanity moved like a glacier, slow and unstoppable, but almost impossible to notice until it was too late. Every human colony ship that launched publicly was matched by 3 that launched in secret. Every trade agreement with alien civilizations was used to gather intelligence about blind spots in their detection networks. Captain Anna Foster commanded one of humanity's deep space exploration fleets, pushing ever deeper into uncharted space using ships that bent light around themselves like invisible ghosts. Her mission was simple: find worlds that the galaxy had missed, claim them quietly, and move on before anyone noticed. In the past decade, her ships had discovered 47 habitable planets that existed in the gaps between alien star charts. Technology that made this possible came from studying crashed alien vessels and abandoned space stations. Humanity had become expert scavengers, learning to reverse engineer technology from scraps and fragments that other species considered worthless junk. Each discovery was carefully analyzed, improved upon, and integrated into human designs without leaving any trace of its origins. Back on the monitoring station, Lieutenant Kara, now a commander herself, occasionally noticed strange readings from the outer spiral arms. Sometimes sensors would detect brief energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. Other times, gravitational anomalies would suggest the presence of large objects where none should exist. But these readings were always fleeting, always ambiguous, and always dismissed as sensor ghosts or natural phenomena. The Dominion's intelligence networks were designed to detect conventional threats. They looked for the obvious signs of military buildup, rapid territorial expansion, and aggressive technology development. They were very good at spotting civilizations that grew too fast or too openly. But they had never encountered a species that deliberately made itself appear weaker than it actually was. Human intelligence operatives had spent decades feeding carefully crafted information to alien governments. Every piece of data about human capabilities, culture, and intentions was designed to reinforce the image of a harmless, curious species that posed no threat to anyone. The aliens had extensive files on human psychology and military strength, but every fact in those files was wrong in exactly the right way. Dr. Emma Walsh, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, reviewed the latest expansion reports from her retirement home on Luna. The numbers were staggering. Humanity now controlled more space than some minor galactic powers, but they had done it so quietly that no one had noticed. Their industrial capacity could build 1,000 ships for everyone that appeared in official records. Their population was growing exponentially on worlds that didn't officially exist. The most impressive achievement was the quantum communication network that connected every human colony, using technology that operated on frequencies the other species had never discovered. Humanity could coordinate their activities across thousands of light years instantly. While the aliens still relied on ships to carry messages between star systems, humans could hold real-time conversations with colonies on the far side of the galaxy. Admiral Reed walked through the corridors of his hidden fleet, past shipyards that built vessels in the empty spaces between stars, past training facilities where human marines learned to fight in zero gravity, past research laboratories where scientists pushed the boundaries of physics in directions that would have alarmed the galactic powers. All of it was invisible, all of it was growing, and all of it was preparing for a day that might never come. The Karathi archives contained detailed psychological profiles of humanity based on decades of observation. According to their experts, humans were curious but cautious, innovative but not aggressive, and most importantly, completely incapable of the kind of coordinated deception that would be required to hide a galactic civilization. The profiles were thorough, well-researched, and absolutely wrong. On his morning rounds, Senior Commander Voss glanced at the human files one more time. 17 colonies, limited technology, no signs of military expansion. The species was developing normally, perhaps even slower than average. He made a note that they might be ready for formal contact with the Dominion within another century or two, then moved on to review more pressing matters. The galaxy continued its ancient dance, secure in the knowledge that all was well and properly ordered. The monitoring systems watched, the intelligence networks gathered information, and the military forces stood ready to deal with any threat that might emerge. But they were all looking in the wrong direction, searching for dangers that would announce themselves with fanfare and aggression. None of them noticed the shadow that was slowly spreading through the empty spaces between stars, growing stronger with each passing year while remaining perfectly, invisibly quiet. A full century had passed since the Dominion Council first established contact protocols with emerging civilizations. The galaxy had settled into comfortable patterns of trade, diplomacy, and controlled expansion. New species still emerged from time to time, following the well-worn path from primitive world to junior member of the galactic community. The process was predictable, orderly, and safe for everyone involved. The Karathi Empire maintained its position as the dominant military power, while the Nexus Trade Federation handled most commercial activities between worlds. The Sentinel Fleet patrolled the major shipping lanes, ensuring that pirates and rebels never became more than minor nuisances. Everything worked exactly as it was supposed to work, and had worked for thousands of years. Ambassador John Miller sat in his modest office on Haven, the neutral world where most interspecies diplomacy took place. His embassy was small, consisting of just 3 rooms and a handful of staff members. This was appropriate for a species that controlled fewer than 50 worlds and had limited influence in galactic affairs. The ambassador spent his days conducting minor trade negotiations and filing reports that portrayed humanity as eager but harmless neighbors. What the other ambassadors didn't know was that Miller's real job had nothing to do with trade agreements. Every conversation he had, every document he read, every casual comment he overheard was carefully analyzed and transmitted back to Earth through channels that no one else knew existed. The modest embassy was actually one of the most sophisticated intelligence gathering operations in galactic history. Miller had been chosen for his role, not because he was a skilled negotiator, but because he was a master of appearing ordinary. He was the kind of person that others forgot they had met 5 minutes after the conversation ended. This made him perfect for his real mission, which was to ensure that humanity continued to appear weak, curious, and completely harmless to anyone. who paid attention. The reports he sent back to Earth painted a detailed picture of galactic politics, military capabilities, and economic structures. Humanity now knew more about the inner workings of the major civilizations than most of their own citizens did. They knew which worlds were strategically important, which trade routes were essential, and which military bases were poorly defended. Most importantly, they knew exactly how the galaxy would respond to different types of threats. Captain Anna Foster stood on the bridge of her exploration vessel, the HSS Pathfinder, as it emerged from hyperspace near a dead star system in unexplored space. Her mission had changed over the years from simple exploration to something much more important. She was now searching for the remains of civilizations that had challenged the Dominion and lost. The system before her had once been home to the Builders, a species that had developed advanced technology and expanded rapidly across dozens of worlds. According to the fragmented records that humanity had pieced together, the Builders had grown too strong too quickly, attracting the attention of the Dominion Council. Within 50 years of first contact, their entire civilization had been reduced to radioactive ruins scattered across empty space. Foster's teams carefully explored the wreckage, extracting data from surviving computer cores and analyzing the remains of builder technology. What they found was both fascinating and terrifying. The Builders had been incredibly advanced, with weapons and defenses that should have been able to resist any attack. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had announced their strength to the galaxy before they were ready to defend it. This was the third extinct civilization that humanity had discovered in the past decade. Each one told the same story. A species would develop advanced technology, expand rapidly, and then attract the attention of the galactic powers. Sometimes they were absorbed peacefully into the Dominion. More often, they were simply destroyed before they could become a real threat. The lesson was clear. The galaxy did not tolerate rivals. Any species that showed signs of becoming a major power would be eliminated before they could challenge the established order. This knowledge had shaped every decision humanity made about their expansion into space. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now Director of Colonial Intelligence, reviewed the latest reports from her office deep beneath the surface of New Terra, a world that existed in no official records. The numbers were staggering, even by human standards. Humanity now controlled over 800 worlds, connected by quantum communication networks that allowed instant coordination across impossible distances. Their industrial capacity exceeded that of several known galactic powers combined. The hidden fleet had grown to include thousands of vessels, from small scouts to massive battleships that dwarfed anything in the Sentinel fleet. Human technology had advanced far beyond what they showed the galaxy, incorporating lessons learned from a dozen extinct civilizations and improvements that no other species had imagined. They had weapons that could crack planets, shields that could withstand stellar bombardment, and engines that could cross the galaxy in days rather than months. All of it remained perfectly hidden from galactic surveillance networks that had been designed to detect conventional threats. The Dominion's sensors looked for energy signatures, gravitational anomalies, and communication patterns that matched known technology. They had never encountered a civilization that had learned to hide in plain sight, using technology that operated outside the normal parameters of detection. Admiral Marcus Reed, now in overall command of humanity's military forces, stood in the war room of the HSS Normandy, humanity's flagship that remained cloaked in the space between galaxies. Holographic displays showed the positions of human forces throughout known space, ready to respond to threats that might never come. But Reed's real concern wasn't external enemies. It was the question of how much longer they could maintain their deception. Every year brought new challenges. Human colonies were growing larger and more numerous. Their technology was advancing at rates that would soon become impossible to conceal. Most importantly, their intelligence networks were picking up signs that other species were beginning to notice inconsistencies in the official story of human development. The Karathi intelligence services had started asking questions about energy readings from supposedly empty star systems. Trade Federation economists were puzzled by subtle shifts in galactic commerce that suggested the presence of major industrial activity in sectors where none should exist. Even the automated monitoring systems were beginning to flag anomalies that couldn't be explained by natural phenomena. Senior Commander Voss, now ancient even by Karathi standards, reviewed his morning reports with growing unease. The humans still appeared to be a minor civilization with limited capabilities, but small details kept nagging at him. Sensor readings that didn't quite make sense. Trade patterns that seemed slightly off. Intelligence reports that contained tiny contradictions that no one else seemed to notice. He had spent over a century monitoring the outer spiral arms, and his instincts told him that something important was happening in the darkness beyond the galactic rim. But every time he tried to focus on the anomalies, they slipped away like shadows at dawn. The evidence was too subtle, too carefully crafted to constitute proof of anything suspicious. On Haven, Ambassador Miller received a coded message through channels that bypassed every security system on the planet. The message was simple but momentous. Prepare for revelation. After more than a century of careful planning and patient growth, humanity was almost ready to show the galaxy what they had become in the darkness between stars. The galaxy continued its ancient patterns, unaware that the balance of power had already shifted beneath its feet. The monitoring systems watched empty space and saw nothing unusual. The intelligence networks gathered information about a species that no longer existed as they imagined it. The military forces prepared for threats that were already among them, hidden in the shadows of their own certainty. Soon, very soon, the galaxy would discover that the quiet species from the outer spiral arm had become something unprecedented in galactic history. But by the time they realized the truth, it would be far too late to prevent what was coming. The emergency sirens echoed through the halls of the Dominion Council chambers for the first time in 300 years. Fleet Admiral Korth of the Sentinel Navy stood before the massive holographic display that showed the galaxy in all its ordered glory, except for one terrifying detail. Entire star systems were going dark along the outer rim, their signals simply vanishing as if they had never existed. The threat had emerged from the void between galaxies without warning. The Void Swarm, as the panicked reports called it, was unlike anything in the historical records. Massive biomechanical creatures that consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. They moved faster than any known technology. Their ships seemed to repair themselves after damage, and worst of all, they were heading directly toward the heart of galactic civilization. Admiral Korth watched helplessly as his frontier fleets reported contact with the enemy. The first engagement lasted less than 20 minutes. 3 Sentinel battleships, pride of the Galactic Navy, were torn apart by creatures that seemed to shrug off their most powerful weapons. The second engagement went even worse. An entire task force vanished without even managing to damage an tonnage. Single enemy vessel. The Karathi Emperor convened an emergency session of the full Dominion Council. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the Great Hall, their faces showing the same expression of disbelief and growing terror. The galaxy had been at peace for so long that most of them had never seen a real war. Now they faced an enemy that could destroy their entire civilization. Senior Commander Voss stood in his monitoring station, watching as sensor readings from the frontier went silent one by one. The automated systems that had faithfully watched the galaxy for centuries were failing as the swarm destroyed the relay stations and communication networks. For the first time in his long career, Voss felt truly helpless. His sensors could detect the enemy, but they could do nothing to stop them. The swarm pressed deeper into galactic space, consuming mining colonies and frontier outposts with horrifying efficiency. Evacuation orders went out to every world within 100 light years of the advancing enemy, but there weren't enough ships to carry everyone to safety. Millions of beings faced the choice between fleeing their homes or staying to die with their worlds. On Haven, Ambassador Miller received the emergency broadcast along with every other diplomatic representative. The neutral world was in chaos, as species that had been allies for centuries suddenly began hoarding resources and positioning their fleets to protect their home systems. The careful order that had governed galactic politics for millennia was falling apart in the face of an enemy that couldn't be negotiated with or understood. Miller locked himself in his private communication chamber and sent a coded message that would change everything. After more than a century of careful hiding, humanity was about to reveal the truth to a galaxy that was no longer in any position to stop them. The message reached Admiral Reed aboard the HSS Normandy within minutes, traveling through quantum channels that the aliens had never discovered. Reed stood in his command center, surrounded by displays showing the positions of over 3,000 human warships that had been quietly moving into position for months. The swarm's arrival had accelerated their timeline, but humanity was ready. Captain Foster received her orders while conducting a reconnaissance mission near the edge of swarm territory. Her small fleet had been shadowing the enemy for weeks, gathering intelligence on their capabilities and weaknesses. What she had discovered was both terrifying and encouraging. The swarm was incredibly powerful, but they followed predictable patterns that could be exploited by someone who understood their behavior. The human fleet began to decloak near the Kepler Defense Station, where the remnants of the Sentinel Navy were making their last stand. The first ship to appear was the HSS Defiance, Admiral Reed's old command, now upgraded with technology that made it larger and more powerful than any vessel in the Galactic Navy. But it was just the beginning. One by one, human warships materialized from empty space around the besieged station. Ships that had been built in hidden shipyards, crewed by soldiers who had trained in secret facilities, armed with weapons that incorporated the best technology from a dozen extinct civilizations. Within minutes, over 200 vessels had appeared where none had existed moments before. The Dominion fleet commanders stared in shock at their sensors. The ships that surrounded them were clearly human in design, but they were impossible. Humanity was supposed to be a minor civilization with limited technology and fewer than 50 worlds. The fleet that had just appeared was larger and more advanced than anything the Sentinels could field. Admiral Reed opened communications with the stunned Dominion officers. His voice was calm and professional, as if the appearance of a massive, hidden fleet was the most natural thing in the world. "This is Admiral Reed of the Human Colonial Fleet. We are here to assist in the defense against the Void Swarm." The human ships moved into formation with practiced precision, their movements coordinated by communication systems that operated faster than anything the galaxy had ever seen. As the swarm creatures approached the defense station, expecting to find the same helpless prey they had encountered everywhere else, they instead met weapons that had been specifically designed to counter their abilities. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had witnessed. Human plasma cannons tore through swarm bio-armor that had resisted every Dominion weapon. Quantum torpedoes disrupted the creature's ability to regenerate, while shield technology borrowed from extinct civilizations protected the human ships from the enemy's most devastating attacks. For the first time since the invasion began, the swarm was not just being resisted, but actually driven back. Captain Foster led a squadron of human fighters in a precision strike against the largest swarm vessel, a biomechanical nightmare the size of a small moon. Her ships moved through the enemy formation like they had been practicing the maneuver for years, which in fact they had. Human intelligence had been studying the swarm for decades, preparing for this exact confrontation through careful analysis of their behavior patterns and weaknesses. The tide of battle turned within hours. The swarm creatures that had seemed unstoppable suddenly found themselves outmatched by an enemy they had never encountered before. The human fleet fought with a coordination and effectiveness that stunned the watching Dominion officers. These weren't the primitive beings they had dismissed for over a century. This was a military force that had been preparing for galactic war while pretending to be harmless explorers. As the last swarm vessels retreated into the void, the human fleet regrouped around the defense station. The Dominion commanders finally found their voices, demanding explanations for what they had just witnessed. How had humanity hidden such a massive fleet? Where had their advanced technology come from? How long had they been preparing for this kind of conflict? Admiral Reed's response was simple and devastating. "We have been watching you for 150 years. We have been learning from your mistakes and preparing for threats that you never saw coming. The galaxy is about to change, and we wanted to be ready when it did." The revelation sent shockwaves through every remaining communication channel in the galaxy. Humanity, the quiet species from the outer spiral arm, had been secretly building a civilization that rivaled the greatest powers in galactic history. They had hidden their strength so completely that even their most dramatic revelation came as a total surprise to species that thought they knew everything about the universe around them. The Void Swarm had been defeated, but the victory came with a price that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The balance of power that had existed for millennia was gone, replaced by a new reality where humanity was no longer a minor player, but a major force that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The silence in the Dominion Council chambers was deafening. Emperor Thane of the Karathi Empire stood before the Great Assembly, holding intelligence reports that painted an impossible picture. The humans hadn't just been hiding a fleet or a few secret colonies. They had built an entire shadow civilization that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. The numbers were staggering. 1,500 worlds under human control. A fleet of over 5,000 warships. Industrial capacity that could supply the entire galaxy twice over. Population centers hidden in places the Dominion had written off as worthless space. Most shocking of all, they had been doing this for over 2 centuries, while appearing to be nothing more than curious primitives taking baby steps into space. Senior Commander Voss sat in his quarters aboard the monitoring station, staring at his own reports with disbelief. Every single assessment he had made about humanity over the past century and a half had been wrong. Not slightly wrong, but completely and utterly incorrect in ways that should have been impossible. The species he had dismissed as harmless had somehow become the most powerful force in galactic history without anyone noticing. The evidence had been there all along, scattered through decades of sensor readings and intelligence reports. Energy signatures that didn't match known technology. Gravitational anomalies that suggested massive structures in empty space. Trade patterns that implied industrial activity where none should exist. But the evidence had been so carefully crafted that it looked like nothing more than background noise and sensor errors. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Assembly, her presence there a shock to everyone in attendance. As Secretary General of the Human Colonial Union, she was revealing herself as the leader of a government that most delegates hadn't known existed until 3 days ago. Her words were diplomatic but firm as she addressed the stunned representatives of dozens of species. "We sought cooperation, not conquest," she said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "But we also learned from history. Every species that revealed their strength too early was either absorbed or destroyed. We chose a different path. We chose to grow strong in silence, to prepare for threats that others couldn't see, and to reveal ourselves only when we were ready to defend what we had built." The economic implications of humanity's revelation were staggering. Trade Federation analysts worked around the clock, trying to understand how human industrial capacity had grown so large without affecting galactic markets. The answer was both simple and terrifying. Humanity had been creating their own markets. their own supply chains and their own economic systems completely separate from the rest of the galaxy. Human agricultural worlds could feed every hungry planet in known space. Their manufacturing centers could produce goods at rates that would crash existing markets overnight. Their research facilities had made breakthroughs in medicine, energy, production, and space travel that were generations ahead of current galactic standards. They hadn't just been hiding their military strength. They had been hiding an entire technological revolution. Ambassador Miller found himself in the strange position of dropping his carefully maintained cover after decades of playing the role of a minor diplomat. In his first honest briefing to the Galactic Assembly, he revealed the scope of human intelligence operations. They had been watching, listening, and learning from every major civilization for over a century. They knew the location of secret military bases, the details of classified research projects, and the private communications of galactic leaders. The revelation that humanity had been conducting the most successful espionage operation in galactic history sent shockwaves through every government and military organization. How many of their secrets had been compromised? How long had humans been manipulating galactic politics from the shadows? Most frightening of all, what else might they be capable of that hadn't been revealed yet? Captain Foster returned from her latest mission with news that changed everything once again. The Void Swarm hadn't been defeated, merely driven back to regroup. Her reconnaissance fleets had tracked them to the edge of the galaxy, where they were gathering in numbers that dwarfed their first assault. The threat that had forced humanity to reveal themselves was about to return with 10 times the strength. But this time, the galaxy would not face the swarm alone. Admiral Reed stood before a joint planning session that included military leaders from every major species. The Karathi brought their tactical expertise, the Trade Federation offered their logistical networks, and dozens of smaller civilizations contributed what they could. But everyone understood that humanity would be leading the defense. The human war machine that emerged from the shadows was unlike anything the galaxy had ever imagined. Shipyards that had been hidden in asteroid fields and nebulae began producing vessels openly for the first time. Weapons that incorporated technology from extinct civilizations were shared with allied forces. Most importantly, the quantum communication networks that had kept human space connected were expanded to include every world that wanted protection from the coming storm. Dr. Rodriguez worked with scientists from a dozen species to establish new research partnerships. Human advances in physics, biology, and engineering were shared freely with allies who brought their own expertise to the table. The isolation that had protected humanity during their growth was replaced by cooperation on a scale never before seen in galactic history. The Karathi Emperor found himself in the unprecedented position of signing a mutual defense treaty with a species that his empire had dismissed as primitives just months earlier. The agreement was more than military cooperation. It was recognition that the old order was gone forever. The age of Karathi dominance had ended not through conquest or revolution, but through the simple fact that they were no longer the strongest power in the galaxy. Senior Commander Voss received new orders that seemed impossible after decades of routine monitoring. He was to work with human intelligence officers to establish a new early warning network that would watch for threats from outside the galaxy. The sensors that had failed to detect humanity's rise would be upgraded with technology that could see dangers the galaxy had never imagined. The second Void Swarm assault came 6 months later, and this time the galaxy was ready. Human fleets positioned throughout galactic space, coordinated with allied forces using tactics that had been developed through careful study of the enemy's weaknesses. The battle lasted 3 weeks and covered dozens of star systems, but the outcome was never in doubt. When the last swarm vessel was destroyed or driven back into the void, the galaxy found itself fundamentally changed. The old boundaries between civilizations had become meaningless in the face of cooperation on such a massive scale. Trade routes were redesigned to accommodate human industrial capacity. Scientific research projects were expanded to include human innovations. Most importantly, the careful balance of power that had kept the galaxy stable for millennia was replaced by something new. Captain Foster stood on the observation deck of a new class of exploration vessel, watching as joint human-alien crews prepared for missions that would push the boundaries of known space. The age of hiding was over. Humanity had revealed not just their strength, but their vision of what the galaxy could become when species worked together instead of competing for dominance. The galaxy that had failed to notice humanity's rise was gone, replaced by one where the quiet species from the outer spiral arm had become the foundation of a new order. They had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had grown from primitives to galactic superpower without destroying or displacing the civilizations around them. Instead, they had shown that patience, preparation, and cooperation could accomplish what conquest ever could. The stars that had once been mapped and controlled by ancient empires now belonged to a community that humanity had built in the shadows, one careful step at a time. And for the first time in galactic history, the future seemed brighter than the past.